Ladies and gentlemen, there is a voice in your head that never seems to rest. It narrates, judges, analyzes, and creates endless stories, filling your mind with worries of the past and fears of the future. But have you ever stopped to ask, who is the one listening to this voice? Who are you beyond these thoughts? Step out of the storm of the mind. Come back to the stillness where truth resides. For in that stillness, you do not need to seek God. You simply realize He was never absent. The mind in its restless nature is like a wheel that never stops turning. It moves from one thought to another, ceaselessly constructing scenarios, recalling the past, or anticipating the future. This movement, though seemingly natural, becomes a burden when we are no longer aware of it. Instead of using the mind as a tool, we become trapped in its continuous chatter, mistaking the voice in our heads for our true identity. It is essential to see that thought, by its very nature, is repetitive. It thrives on patterns, habits, and familiar associations. The mind, left unchecked, replays the same worries, the same fears, and the same doubts, creating an illusion of self through memory and projection. But who we are cannot be contained in thought, for thought is fleeting, temporary, and conditioned by past experiences. The truth of who we are is something deeper, something that exists beyond the limitations of the thinking mind. When we believe every thought that arises, we are no longer present. We are lost in mental stories. Stories of regret, guilt, expectation, and desire. The mind constantly seeks, but what it seeks cannot be found in thinking. It is like a man searching for the sun with a candle. No matter how much he looks, the light he holds will never compare to the brilliance of the source itself. Similarly, the peace, joy, and fulfillment we long for cannot be found in the mind's endless activity, but in the space that exists. It is felt by peace and joy, by acceptance, by tempo, social, hope, alternative. Many live their entire lives unaware that they are trapped in thought. They identify completely with the voice in their head, never questioning it, never stepping back to observe. But there is a way to break free. The first step is to recognize that we are not our thoughts. We are the awareness behind them. When a thought arises, instead of immediately following it, we can pause and witness it. We can ask ourselves, who is the one aware of this thought? The moment we do this, a gap appears. In that gap, even if only for a brief moment, there is peace. This is the beginning of freedom. The moment we realize that thoughts are not absolute truth, but simply mental activity, we loosen their grip over us. Imagine watching clouds drift across the sky. Do we chase after them? Do we try to stop them? No, we simply observe them as they come and go. This is how we can relate to thought, not as something that controls us, but as something that arises and passes, while we remain as the silent observer. The scriptures remind us, take every thought captive to make it obedient to Christ. This does not mean suppressing thought, but becoming so aware of it that it no longer dictates our lives. When a negative thought arises, we do not need to fight it or believe it. We simply see it for what it is, a passing cloud in the sky of our awareness. This realization is powerful because it shifts us from being lost in thought to being present. The present moment is where life truly happens. It is where we experience the fullness of existence, unfiltered by the mind's constant interference. The more we rest in presence, the less power thought has over us. Instead of being carried away by mental noise, we begin to experience a deep sense of stillness, a peace that surpasses all understanding. In this stillness, wisdom arises. Decisions are no longer based on fear or compulsion, but on clarity and intuition. We act not out of mental struggle, but from a place of inner knowing. The more we trust this process, the more we realize that excessive thinking is not necessary for true understanding. Thought has its place. It helps us navigate the practical aspects of life, but it is not the source of our deepest truth. The mind is a wonderful servant, but a terrible master. When we are unconscious of its activity, it rules over us, creating endless suffering. But when we become aware, we reclaim our freedom. We step out of the prison of excessive thinking and into the reality of the present moment, where life is not something to be figured out, but something to be lived. There is a profound wisdom in silence, a knowing that goes beyond words and concepts. In a world that glorifies intellect and constant thinking, we have forgotten the power of stillness. Yet, true understanding does not arise from excessive thought, but from the space between thoughts. Silence is not the absence of something. It is the presence of everything. It is in this silence that truth reveals itself, unobstructed by the mind's endless noise. The mind is always seeking, always grasping for answers. It wants to dissect, analyze, and categorize every experience. But the deepest truths cannot be understood through mental effort alone. They can only be realized in the quiet depths of being. Just as a turbulent lake cannot reflect the sky clearly, a restless mind cannot perceive truth. But when the waters of the mind become still, clarity emerges. This is why the scriptures say, "Be still and know that I am God." The knowing spoken of here is not intellectual knowledge, but direct experience. It is not about accumulating more information. It is about resting in the awareness that is already present. The mind may try to grasp at God, to define and explain Him, but divine presence is not something to be thought about, it is something to be felt, to be lived. When we are caught in excessive thinking, we live at the surface of life. We analyze love instead of feeling it. We explain joy instead of experiencing it. And we debate truth instead of living it. But when we embrace silence, we move beyond the surface into the depths of existence itself. In those depths, there is no need for explanation. There is only knowing. Many are afraid of silence because they equate it with emptiness. They fear that if they stop thinking, they will lose themselves. But the opposite is true. When thought fades into the background, what remains is not emptiness, but fullness, the fullness of being, the presence of life itself. It is in this space that we realize we are not separate from God, that the divine is not something distant, but something intimately present in each moment. To enter this silence, we must first learn to listen, not just with our ears, but with our entire being. When we listen deeply, without the interference of thought, we become receptive. In this receptivity, wisdom arises naturally. We do not need to force understanding, it unfolds on its own, like a flower blooming in the sunlight. The greatest spiritual teachers did not attain wisdom through intellectual striving, but through surrender to silence. Jesus often withdrew to quiet places to pray, not because he needed more knowledge, but because in stillness he was one with the Father. When we follow this example, we too enter into a place where words are no longer necessary, where truth is not something we seek, but something we simply are. The greatest illusion we live under is the belief that we are our thoughts. From the moment we wake up to the moment we sleep, the mind generates an endless stream of commentary, judgments, and stories. This mental activity is so constant that we rarely stop to question it. We assume that the voice in our head is who we are. But if we were truly our thoughts, then who is the one aware of them? The ability to observe thought is proof that we are something more than the mind, just as the sky remains unchanged while clouds pass through it. Our true self is the silent awareness behind every thought, emotion, and experience. But because we have been conditioned to identify with thought, we have forgotten this deeper reality. We have mistaken the ever-changing clouds for the sky itself. When we fully believe in the mind's voice, we live in a state of unconsciousness. We react impulsively, caught in cycles of worry, fear, and judgment. We replay painful memories and project imagined futures, never realizing that none of this is happening in the present moment. Instead of experiencing life as it is, we experience life through the filter of mental interpretation. But life is not found in thought. It is found in the still awareness that exists before thought arises. To break free, we must first become aware of the mind's activity. This does not mean suppressing thought, nor does it mean trying to stop it. The mind will continue to think just as the heart continues to beat. But when we step back and witness thought, rather than being absorbed in it, a space opens up. In that space, we begin to see that we are not the mind, we are the awareness watching it. This shift is powerful. Instead of being lost in negative or anxious thoughts, we simply observe them as they come and go. A fearful thought may arise, but instead of reacting, we notice it. There is fear. A judgment may appear, but instead of believing it, we recognize the mind is judging. By doing this, we separate ourselves from the thought, and its power over us weakens. Jesus said, "Do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself." This is a direct invitation to step out of the mind's habit of excessive thinking. Worry is nothing more than the mind projecting itself into a future that does not exist. But if we are present, worry loses its grip. In the present moment, there is no future to fear and no past to regret. There is only now, and now is always enough. This practice of witnessing thought is not a one-time event. It is a continual returning to awareness. At first, the mind will resist. It will try to pull us back into its stories, convincing us that thinking is necessary for control and survival. But with time, as we rest more in awareness, thought loosens its grip. We begin to live with greater peace, no longer at the mercy of every passing mental impulse. Once we no longer identify with thought, we see life with new eyes. We respond rather than react. We experience joy without needing a reason. We listen more deeply, love more freely, and trust more fully. We no longer seek ourselves in mental narratives, for we have found something deeper, that something that was never lost, only overlooked. This is the freedom that comes when we step out of identification with the mind. Thought will continue to come and go, but we are no longer controlled by it. Instead, we rest in the stillness behind thought, where peace, wisdom, and divine presence are always waiting. Surrender is often misunderstood. To the mind, surrender seems like weakness, like giving up control, but in truth, surrender is the highest form of strength. It is the recognition that the intelligence guiding life is far greater than the limited thoughts we hold on to. It is the act of releasing the burden of excessive thinking and stepping into a deeper trust. A trust in the present moment, in divine timing, and in the wisdom that arises when we let go. The mind constantly seeks to control. It wants certainty, security, and answers. It analyzes, plans, and worries in an attempt to protect us from the unknown. But life is not meant to be controlled by thought. It is meant to be experienced. When we try to mentally grasp every aspect of life, we create suffering. We resist what is, and in that resistance we become trapped in a cycle of anxiety and fear. But when we surrender, we move with life rather than against it. Jesus spoke of surrender when he said, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." This is an invitation to lay down the heavy load of excessive thinking. To rest does not mean to stop taking action. It means to stop struggling internally. It means trusting that there is a greater intelligence at work beyond what the mind can comprehend. Surrender does not mean that we do nothing. It means that we act from a place of presence, rather than from a place of mental resistance. When we trust life, we stop trying to force solutions through overthinking. Instead, we remain open, allowing wisdom to arise naturally. Decisions become clearer, actions become more effective, and life flows with greater ease. The mind often asks, "What if things go wrong?" But surrender asks, "What if things are unfolding exactly as they should?" The moment we release the need to control every detail, we make space for divine guidance. The mind cannot always see the full picture, but life knows what it is doing. A seed does not struggle to become a tree. It grows because it surrenders to the process. Likewise, when we stop interfering with the flow of life through excessive thinking, we allow things to unfold in their perfect time. Many people fear surrender because they believe it means losing something. But surrender does not take anything away. It only removes what was never real to begin with. The worries, fears, and imagined problems created by the mind do not serve us. When we let them go, we do not lose anything essential. We gain peace, clarity, and freedom. We recognize that life has always been supporting us. The birds do not worry about where their next meal will come from, yet they are fed. The flowers do not stress about their growth, yet they bloom in season. If creation itself is sustained effortlessly, why do we believe we must figure out everything on our own? The same intelligence that orchestrates the stars also guides our path. But to experience this, we must let go of the mind's need for control and open ourselves to trust. Surrender is not something that happens once, it is a continuous practice. Each moment invites us to release unnecessary thinking and return to presence. Each day offers opportunities to choose trust over fear, stillness over mental noise. The more we surrender, the more we see that life is not a problem to be solved, but a mystery to be lived. When we surrender, we step into a state of grace. We move from effort to ease, from fear to faith, from resistance to flow. Thought no longer dominates us because we have found something deeper. The quiet assurance that all is well, not because we have figured it out, but because we have stopped trying to. In that surrender, we find the peace that was waiting for us all along. The journey out of excessive thinking is not about eliminating thought, but about reclaiming our awareness from it. The mind will continue to generate thoughts just as the heart continues to beat, but we are not bound to its every movement. When we recognize thought as something that arises and passes rather than something that defines us, we step into a place of freedom